contractor's voice shook as he said, "Ma'am, we found something hidden inside your grandpa's walls." Before I could even ask what it was, he hung up. Less than 5 minutes later, my phone rang again. This time, his words came out in a whisper. "The police are here. You need to get here right away." Just a week earlier, my parents had smiled through Grandpa's funeral while quietly taking every dollar he left behind. They claimed the money was family property and handed me the only thing they didn't want, his crumbling, mold-covered farmhouse. My mother called it a burden. My father laughed and said I should be grateful I got anything at all. I stood in the dusty hallway of that forgotten house, surrounded by peeling wallpaper, cracked windows, and the faint smell of old cedar. Every board creaked beneath my feet, as if the house itself remembered the truth everyone else wanted buried. Grandpa had always told me that appearances could fool greedy people. I never understood what he meant until that phone call. When I pulled into the driveway, flashing blue lights reflected across the broken windows. Police officers stood near a section of the living room wall that had been torn open during renovations. The contractor looked pale, almost unable to speak. My parents had believed they buried me with that collapsing house. They had no idea Grandpa had hidden something far more valuable than money inside those walls. And whatever the police had uncovered was about to destroy every lie they had built their lives on. My name is Daniel, and for as long as I can remember, I was the son my parents treated like an afterthought. My older brother always received the praise, the expensive gifts, and every opportunity, while I was expected to accept whatever scraps remained without complaint. The only person who ever made me feel seen was my grandpa. He never measured people by their bank accounts or loud opinions. He judged them by their character, and he quietly reminded me that patience often reveals truths that anger never can. After I finished college, I built a modest career restoring historic homes, choosing steady work over chasing quick money. My parents mocked that decision whenever they could, calling me the family handyman, as if honest work was something to be embarrassed about. I stopped defending myself, because I realized they had already decided who I was long before I had the chance to prove them wrong. Grandpa noticed everything they ignored. During quiet evenings on his porch, he would tell me stories about hard times, careful planning, and how greed eventually exposes itself without needing any help. At the time, I thought those conversations were simply lessons from an old man looking back on his life. I didn't realize he was preparing me for a day when everyone else would underestimate me one last time, and that their own choices would become the reason they lost everything they thought they had won. The week after Grandpa's funeral felt strangely quiet, but beneath that silence, I could sense something shifting. My parents never asked how I was handling the loss. Every phone call was about paperwork, insurance forms, or whether I had started cleaning that worthless old place. They spoke about Grandpa's home as if it were nothing more than a pile of rotten wood waiting to be demolished. When I stopped by their house to collect a few family photographs, my father slid a small box across the table without looking me in the eyes. "These were all he left for you," he said in a flat voice. Inside were faded pictures, Grandpa's old pocket watch that no longer worked, and a handwritten recipe card. The bank statements, investment files, and legal documents were nowhere to be found. As I quietly packed the box, I noticed my parents exchanging brief glances whenever Grandpa's estate was mentioned. Their conversations paused the moment I entered the room, then resumed only after I walked away. It wasn't obvious enough to accuse them of anything, but it was impossible to ignore. Back at the old house, every cracked floorboard and dusty shelf reminded me of Grandpa's careful nature. He had spent his entire life planning ahead. The idea that he would leave everything important to chance didn't fit the man. I knew. That thought stayed with me as the contractors began removing the damaged walls, unaware they were only hours away from uncovering a secret no one expected. By the third day of renovations, I stopped thinking about what my parents had taken and started focusing on what Grandpa had chosen to leave behind. Regret wasn't going to rebuild the house, and arguing with them wouldn't change a single decision they had already made. If there was any truth left to uncover, it would be inside these walls, not in another pointless family confrontation. That afternoon, the contractor called me over to a section of the living room where an unusually solid sound echoed behind the plaster. He frowned, tapped the wall again, and quietly said, "This doesn't match the rest of the house." A few careful cuts exposed a narrow steel compartment hidden between the wooden studs. It wasn't large, but it had been installed with remarkable precision decades earlier. Inside sat a weathered metal box untouched by time. Before anyone opened it, The contractor suggested we document everything exactly as we found it. I agreed immediately. Grandpa had always respected doing things the right way, and so did I. As photographs were taken, one of the workers noticed markings on several old documents inside the box. That raised legal questions. Following procedure, the contractor contacted the authorities rather than guessing what they meant. Standing in the dusty room, I realized something important. My parents believed the story had ended the day they kept Grandpa's money and handed me his broken house. In reality, that was only the beginning. For the first time since the funeral, I wasn't chasing justice. It was quietly making its way toward me. While the officers completed their initial inspection, I stayed out of the way and answered every question with simple, factual responses. Years of restoring historic homes had taught me that old buildings often held surprises, but they had also taught me something more valuable. Every discovery needed to be documented carefully. Assumptions ruined cases. Records protected the truth. The lead investigator explained that the contents of the metal box could affect Grandpa's estate, so the evidence had to remain sealed until it was reviewed. I nodded without argument. I wasn't interested in shortcuts. If my parents had manipulated anything after Grandpa's death, the official record would expose it far better than an emotional confrontation ever could. That evening, I contacted an experienced probate attorney and gave him copies of every document I legally possessed, including the estate papers my parents had allowed me to see. We compared dates, signatures, and property records without making accusations. Whenever something didn't match, my attorney simply added another note to the growing file. I never called my parents to warn them. I never hinted that the police had found anything unusual. They continued living as though the inheritance had already been settled, completely unaware that every official report, photograph, and legal record was quietly building a timeline that could not be argued away. Sometimes the strongest move isn't striking back. It's allowing the truth to arrive with enough evidence that no one can escape it. 2 weeks later, my attorney called with the words I had been waiting to hear. The documents from the hidden box had been authenticated. Among them was Grandpa's original estate plan, handwritten letters explaining his intentions, and financial records that directly contradicted the paperwork my parents had presented after his death. The investigation didn't rely on my opinion. It relied on dates, signatures, and evidence that had remained untouched behind those walls for decades. A court hearing followed. I sat quietly beside my attorney, while my parents confidently repeated the same story they had told everyone since the funeral. That confidence faded the moment the investigators introduced the newly discovered documents into the record. The courtroom fell silent as each page was examined. My parents exchanged nervous glances, but there was nothing left to explain away. The judge ordered a full review of the estate and temporarily froze the remaining inherited assets until the investigation was complete. Watching that decision unfold felt strangely peaceful. I didn't smile. I didn't celebrate. I simply listened as the truth replaced every lie, one document at a time. When we walked out of the courthouse, my parents tried to call my name for the first time in weeks. I kept walking toward my truck without looking back. They had mistaken silence for weakness. In the end, silence became the one thing they could never argue against. News of the court's decision spread through our family far faster than I expected. Relatives who had quietly accepted my parents' version of events suddenly began asking difficult questions. A few called to apologize for believing I had been ungrateful when I accepted Grandpa's old house without complaint. Others admitted they had noticed inconsistencies after the funeral but had chosen to stay silent to avoid conflict. Their honesty didn't erase the past, but it reminded me how easily people accept the loudest story until the facts finally surface. As for me, the greatest change wasn't financial. It was realizing I no longer needed my parents' approval to measure my worth. Grandpa had trusted my character long before anyone else did, and that trust proved more valuable than anything hidden inside the walls. That's why this story matters. Greed often wins the first round because it moves quickly, while truth moves carefully. But when truth is backed by patience, evidence, and integrity, it has a way of lasting long after every shortcut collapses. Some inherit money, others inherit the courage to protect what is right. In the end, I discovered which legacy was truly worth keeping. Months after the investigation ended, I finally understood that Grandpa's greatest gift had never been the estate. It was the quiet confidence he had planted in me long before any hidden documents were found. He taught me that integrity doesn't need applause, and that truth has a way of finding daylight if you're willing to wait for it. The court restored the estate according to Grandpa's original wishes, but I chose not to chase the bitterness that had consumed my parents. Instead, I restored the old house room by room, preserving the place where Grandpa had spent a lifetime building memories instead of wealth. Every repaired floorboard and freshly painted wall felt less like construction and more like honoring the man who had believed in me when no one else did. My parents reached out several times. Their messages grew quieter with each passing month, but I wasn't looking for revenge anymore, and I wasn't looking for reconciliation either. Some bridges collapsed because they were never built on honesty. I wished them peace from a distance and continued living my own life without carrying the weight of their choices. Today, the old farmhouse stands stronger than it has in decades. Children laugh on the porch where Grandpa once shared his stories. And every sunset reminds me that healing is built the same way as trust, slowly, patiently, one careful step at a time. People often think justice is loud, dramatic, and immediate. Mine arrived quietly, wrapped in patience, evidence, and the lessons of a good man. In the end, the walls didn't just reveal Grandpa's secret. They revealed the character of everyone who stood inside them.